The rescue. The snow had already begun to claim her when the horse collapsed. Eliza Harper did not scream. The cold had stolen that from her hours ago. She slid from the saddle into the whitened grass, her fingers numb, her thoughts drifting between prayer and resignation. The world felt distant, as if she were already watching it from somewhere else. Her father's voice echoed faintly in her memory. "Keep moving, Ellie. The land favors the living, but the land offered her no such kindness tonight." It was the sound of hooves that kept her alive. Chief Awanita reined in his horse at the edge of the ravine, his gaze sharp despite the falling snow. He had been tracking signs of soldiers encroaching too near Cheyenne winter grounds when he saw the unnatural stillness of a body against the white. A settler girl, alone, barely breathing. He did not hesitate, though hesitation would have been easier. Awanita dismounted and knelt beside her, his movements deliberate, respectful. The girl's coat was torn, her hands bloodied by cold and fear. She could not have survived the night. He lifted her with care, as one would lift something fragile and unwanted by fate, and secured her to his horse. Duty, he told himself. Nothing more. Eliza woke to warmth that felt unreal. For a moment, she believed she was dead. Smoke curled toward the roof of a lodge, and the scent of burning would fill her lungs. Her body ached in ways that confirmed she still belonged to it. When she tried to move, pain answered sharply, grounding her in the present. A man sat across from her, silent as the shadows. He was tall, his hair dark and bound simply, his expression composed but unreadable. His eyes held neither cruelty nor comfort, only awareness. "You are safe," he said at last, his voice low and steady. "For now," she swallowed, fear threading through her relief. "You're Cheyenne." "I am." Eliza tightened her grip on the blanket. Stories told in settler camps rushed into her mind, but none matched the calm before her. "Why am I here?" Awanita did not answer immediately. Outside, the wind pressed against the lodge like a question without an answer. "Because leaving you would have meant death," he said finally. "And I do not choose death when another path exists." She studied him, searching for threat, for expectation. Finding neither unsettled her more than hostility would have. "My name is Eliza Harper," she said. "My father. He is gone," Awanita said gently, not unkindly. "I found no others." The words struck deeper than the cold ever had. Eliza turned her face away, grief arriving late but fierce. She had survived when she should not have. She did not yet know how to carry that weight. Days passed measured by firelight and quiet routines. Eliza learned quickly that Awanita kept distance not from fear, but from principle. Others in the camp tended to her when needed, offering food and water with cautious courtesy. She was an outsider, but not a prisoner. The unspoken rule was clear. She remained because she was alive, not because she belonged. Awanita visited only to ensure she healed. He spoke little, but when he did, his words were precise. He taught her how to hold a cup without spilling when her hands still shook, how to listen to the wind for changes in weather. He did not touch her unless necessary. Each boundary was deliberate. One evening, voices carried into the lodge, settlers arguing beyond the camp's edge, escorted by Cheyenne scouts. Eliza caught fragments of conversation. A cavalry post nearby, a woman named Margaret Cole, whispers of a captain who spent more time in tents, not his own. "Why do they come here?" Eliza asked softly. Awanita's jaw tightened. "Because promises are made easily on open land," he said, "and broken just as easily." The words lingered between them, heavier than intended. That night, Eliza dreamed of her father standing between two worlds, unable to cross either. When she woke, the fire had burned low, and Awanita sat awake, watching the embers as though guarding more than flame. "You could have left me," she said, her voice barely above the crackle. "It would have been simpler." "Yes," he agreed. "Then why didn't you?" Awanita met her gaze, and for the first time, something like conflict surfaced in his eyes. "Because survival is not only about living," he said. "It is about what kind of man you remain after." Eliza understood, then, that her presence was not without cost. Outside, the snow began to fall again, quiet and relentless. The world beyond the camp waited with its laws, its judgments, its betrayals yet to unfold. Between them lay a fragile peace, earned, uncertain, and already threatened by feelings neither of them was prepared to name. When Awanita stood to leave, he paused at the entrance. "You will heal," he said, "but what comes after will be harder." Eliza watched him disappear into the night, knowing the truth of his words. Safety had found her, but peace, she sensed, would demand a price neither of them had yet agreed to pay. Lines that should not move. Eliza's strength returned in small increments, like light creeping across the plains at dawn. Each morning, she woke with less pain in her limbs and more awareness of where she was and who had saved her. Gratitude came easily. Understanding did not. The camp had settled into a winter rhythm. Smoke rose at the same hours, footsteps traced familiar paths in the snow, and voices carried softly, never wasted. Eliza began to help where she could, mending torn hides, grinding grain, keeping her hands busy to quiet her thoughts. No one ordered her to work. The choice mattered. It made her feel less like a burden and more like a presence temporarily allowed. Awanita watched without comment. He spoke to her more now, though always with restraint. Their conversation stayed practical at first. How to read cloud cover, how to preserve meat, why the river bent where it did. Yet even these lessons carried an intimacy she could not ignore. He never raised his voice. He never rushed her. In his patience, Eliza found something she had not known she'd lost. One afternoon, as they walked along the frozen edge of the creek, she asked, "Did you ever want to leave this land?" Awanita considered the question longer than necessary. "Wanting is easy," he said. "Belonging is harder." She nodded, sensing the distance between them was not only cultural, but chosen. "My father wanted land," she said. "He thought owning it would mean safety." "And did it?" Awanita asked. Eliza stopped walking. "No." The answer hung between them, stark and final. Awanita inclined his head, as if acknowledging a truth he already knew. News traveled slowly, but it always arrived. A group of settlers passed through the camp under watchful escort. Eliza recognized Margaret Cole immediately, a woman with careful posture and eyes too alert for comfort. Margaret spoke politely, yet her gaze drifted often, searching. When Eliza caught her looking toward the cavalry road, her expression tightened. That night, Eliza overheard whispers near the fire. Captain Jonathan Reed, stationed east, had been seen visiting Margaret's tent long after dusk, despite being formally promised elsewhere. The story was told with disapproval, but also resignation. No one seemed surprised. Eliza felt an unexpected chill. Later, she asked Awanita, "Does betrayal always reveal itself?" "No," he replied. "Sometimes it lives quietly for years, fed by silence." She thought of Margaret's restless eyes, of promises made and unkept. The thought unsettled her more than the winter air. As days passed, Eliza found herself waiting for Awanita's presence. She measured time by his footsteps, listened for his voice among others. When he was gone on patrol, the camp felt hollow. She told herself it was gratitude, dependence born of survival, nothing more. Yet one evening, as they sat near the fire, the distance between them closed without intention. Their shoulders did not touch, but the space felt charged, alive with unspoken thought. "You will not stay here forever," Awanita said, his eyes fixed on the flames. "No," Eliza agreed. "I know. When the snow melts, settlers will travel again. I could go with them." The idea felt heavier once spoken. "That is what I should do." Awanita's jaw tightened. "Should," he repeated quietly. The word carried weight. Obligation, expectation, a boundary neither of them had crossed, yet both were standing too near. Eliza's voice softened. "You saved my life. I did what was required." "Required by whom?" Awanita turned to her then, his gaze steady but troubled. "By the man I am expected to be." The fire crackled sharply, as if answering for him. That night, Eliza lay awake, listening to the camp breathe. She realized with sudden clarity that she was leaning on Awanita in ways that exceeded survival. She sought his presence not because she needed protection, but because she wanted understanding, comfort, something dangerously close to intimacy. The realization brought guilt swift and unwelcome. She remembered Margaret Cole's guarded smiles, Captain Reed's quiet visits under cover of darkness. Emotional closeness before open betrayal. A line crossed not by touch, but by need. Eliza rose and stepped outside, letting the cold bite her skin as punishment. The stars burned bright above her, indifferent and eternal. She wondered if love always began this way, quietly, improperly, before anyone was brave enough to name it. Behind her, footsteps approached. "You should not be out here alone," Awanita said. "I needed air," she replied. Then, more honestly, "I needed distance." He studied her, understanding flickering across his features. "Distance protects," he said, "but can also wound." She met his gaze. "Then why stay so close?" The question was unfair. She knew it as soon as it left her mouth. Awanita looked away, toward the dark horizon, because turning away does not always end what has already begun. They stood there in silence, the space between them once again carefully measured. No vow was broken, no promise made. Yet something had shifted, subtly, irrevocably. As Eliza returned to the lodge, she understood the danger she now carried was not the land, nor the settlers, nor the winter still clinging to the earth. It was the quiet knowledge that her heart had begun to step beyond the boundaries reason had drawn, and that Awanita, despite every effort, was standing on the same uncertain ground. The cost of crossing. The warning came at dawn, carried by a scout whose breath smoked with urgency. Soldiers were moving west, too close, too many, and too early for coincidence. The camp shifted at once, quiet efficiency replacing the fragile calm that had held through winter. Fires were dampened. Children were ushered inside. Horses were readied with practiced speed. Eliza felt the tension before she understood it. The air itself seemed to tighten, as if the land were bracing. Awanita found her near the lodge, fastening a cloak with hands steadier than she felt. "You must stay close today," he said. "Do not wander." "I won't," she promised, then added, "Are they coming for us?" "They come for control," he replied. "We are simply in the way." The truth of it settled heavily. Eliza had lived among settlers long enough to recognize the language of justification. Safety was always claimed after harm was already decided. As the day wore on, messengers arrived and departed. Eliza helped where she could, her mind sharp, her heart restless. She searched for Awanita's presence more often than she meant to. When she finally found him alone, standing at the ridge that overlooked the frozen valley, relief washed through her with alarming force. "You should not be here," he said without turning. "Neither should you," she answered. He faced her then, and the lines of command he wore for others slipped, leaving only a man weighted by responsibility. "If they advance, I will meet them," he said. "If they do not listen, I will delay them." "And if delay costs you?" she asked. "Then that is the cost." The simplicity of his acceptance frightened her more than any approaching soldiers. By nightfall, the camp waited in a silence too careful to be calm. Eliza sat alone, unable to sleep, each sound sharpening her awareness. When footsteps stopped outside her lodge, she knew who it would be. Awanita entered without ceremony, his expression grave. "You should be prepared," he said. "At first light, I will send you with the settlers moving south." Her chest tightened. "You're sending me away?" "Yes." "When?" The word escaped her like a plea. "Tomorrow." The finality of it struck harder than expected. Eliza stood, anger and fear tangling into resolve. "You don't get to decide that alone." "I do," he said, then softened. "I must." The space between them felt suddenly insufficient. Months of restraint pressed forward, demanding reckoning. Eliza saw it in his eyes, the same conflict she felt burning in her own chest. "You saved me," she said quietly, "and now you're pushing me back into the same world that destroyed everything I had." "I'm trying to save you again," Awanita replied. From what staying would cost, or from what wanting would mean, she challenged. The words landed true. Too true. Awanita closed his eyes briefly, as if bracing against himself. When he opened them, the resolve he carried for others faltered. We should not be standing this close, he said. I know. Neither moved. The moment that followed was not born of passion, but of exhaustion. Two people worn thin by silence and fear. When Awanita reached for her, it was with hesitation, his hand hovering before making contact, as if granting her the last chance to refuse. Eliza did not. The kiss was brief, restrained, and heavy with consequence. It carried no fantasy, no illusion of escape, only acknowledgement of what they had already become to one another. When they separated, the weight of it pressed down immediately. Awanita stepped back first. This changes nothing, he said, though his voice lacked certainty. It changes everything, Eliza replied. The consequences did not wait. Before dawn, word reached the camp that Captain Jonathan Reed had been exposed. Margaret Cole's betrayal, once whispered, now stood undeniable. Promises broken in secrecy had found daylight, and the reckoning was swift. Reed was recalled in disgrace. Margaret was left with neither protection nor sympathy. Eliza watched from a distance as Margaret stood alone, her composure finally cracked, and understood the future that followed quiet transgressions. There was no triumph in the knowledge, only warning. At sunrise, Awanita returned to Eliza with 2 horses and a guide. He did not speak of the night before. The omission hurt more than reproach would have. This will take you south, he said. You will be safer among them. Eliza mounted her horse, hands trembling now that the decision had been made. And you? I will remain, he answered, as I always have. She searched his face, hoping for something, regret, longing, permission to stay. She found only resolve reforged by sacrifice. Before she could stop herself, she said, if we had met in another life. Awanita shook his head gently. Do not build homes in imagined worlds, he said. They cannot shelter you. The guide signaled it was time. Eliza nodded, swallowing the ache rising in her throat. As she turned her horse away, she felt the full cost of the line they had crossed. Not because it had been taken, but because it could not be undone. She rode south as the camp faded behind her, carrying with her a truth heavier than grief. Love, once awakened, demanded not fulfillment, but restraint, and the strength to live with what had almost been. Behind her, Awanita watched until the horizon swallowed her path, then turned back to his people, bearing the quiet burden of a choice made too late and honored too fully. What was chosen? The journey south was quieter than Eliza expected. The settlers spoke little, as though words might draw trouble from the land. At night, fires burned low, and Eliza lay awake beneath borrowed blankets, staring at unfamiliar stars. She told herself she was relieved. She was returning to what she knew. Roads, rules, faces that would not look at her as a question. Yet each mile carried her farther from the only place where she had felt truly seen. She replayed her final moments in the camp with painful clarity. Awanita's composed voice, the way he refused imagined futures, the discipline with which he closed a door that had nearly opened. The kiss they shared did not haunt her for its warmth, but for its restraint. It had been an ending disguised as permission. By the time the settlers reached the edge of established territory, spring had begun its slow claim on the land. Snow thinned. Mud replaced ice. Life resumed its ordinary persistence. So did consequence. Captain Jonathan Reed's disgrace traveled faster than Eliza did. By the time she reached the nearest settlement, his name was already spoken with contempt. Promises broken in private had been made public, and the uniform that once protected him now marked him for judgment. Margaret Cole arrived weeks later, her reputation hollowed out by whispers she could not outrun. Eliza saw her once, across the street near the trading post. Margaret's posture remained elegant, but her eyes no longer searched, they avoided. When their gazes briefly met, something passed between them that required no words. Eliza did not see a villain. She saw a woman who had mistaken secrecy for safety and paid for it with isolation. That night, Eliza understood fully what Awanita had meant. Infidelity did not end with exposure. It lingered. It reshaped lives quietly and permanently. Eliza found work as a school assistant, her days filled with children learning letters they would one day use to name their own losses and hopes. She was grateful for the simplicity. Teaching demanded presence. It left little room for regret. Still, some evenings, when the wind moved just right, she was carried back to firelight and snow-dulled silence. She wrote often, but sent nothing. Letters to no one in particular filled pages she folded and hid away. In them, she did not confess love. She spoke instead of restraint, of choices made not because they were easy, but because they were necessary. Writing became a way to honor what had not been taken. Years passed. The land changed hands. Roads widened. Stories flattened into rumor. Eliza grew steadier, older, her grief transforming into something quieter, less sharp, more instructive. One spring morning, a Cheyenne trader passed through the settlement. Eliza recognized the markings on his horse blanket immediately. Her breath caught before she could stop it. "Do you know Chief Awanita?" she asked, careful to keep her voice even. The man studied her, then nodded. "I do. Is he well?" "He lives," the trader said. "That is not the same thing, but it is enough." Eliza closed her eyes briefly, relief and sorrow arriving together. "Please tell him," she said, then hesitated. "Tell him the girl he saved learned how to survive." The trader inclined his head. "I think," he said gently, "he already knows." That night, Eliza dreamed not of what might have been, but of what was chosen. She saw Awanita standing at the edge of the valley, watching seasons pass without regret, carrying the weight of his people and the quiet truth of a love refused. She woke with tears on her face, but no bitterness in her heart. Some loves, she realized, were not meant to be lived. They were meant to be remembered as proof that restraint was possible, even when desire was real. Far to the north, Awanita stood on the same ridge where he had once watched her ride away. The land was green now, alive with motion and promise. His people endured. That had always been the measure. Yet sometimes, in the still moments before dawn, he allowed himself memory. Not of the kiss, but of the choice. He did not regret it. Regret belonged to those who took what they could not keep. As the sun rose, Awanita turned back toward the camp, carrying forward the same truth that had guided him from the beginning. Survival was not merely the act of living. It was the discipline of remaining whole. And somewhere beyond the horizon, a woman who had once been lost had learned the same lesson. Their paths would not cross again, but what had passed between them endured, not as betrayal, not as romance, but as the quiet knowledge that love, when honored properly, did not destroy. It taught, and that lesson, once learned, never truly ends.